Hello, everyone. Welcome to the DMV Business Show. I'm your host, Otto Sevilla, and today we have a very special guest. We have the founder and CEO of Balti Virtual, Will G. Will G. I'm sorry. Welcome to the show, Will.
G, it's all good. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Of course. The pleasure is all mine. Especially now with, I just heard this morning the latest news, Microsoft buying Activision for almost 70 billion.
Big acquisition. Yeah. No, they've been, I think someone just pointed out, it's kind of mind blowing that the same company that now owns or will own Call of Duty also owns LinkedIn. It's a pretty diverse portfolio there.
Yeah, it definitely is. So, well, before we get started, I'd like the audience to get to know a little bit as far as the company. So what is Balti Virtual?
So Balti Virtual is a software studio that is focused on building immersive experiences, augmented and virtual reality. And so those take a bunch of different forms, but typically we're working for clients. We're building out an experience, whether that's for marketing or a trade show, or actually to serve some kind of important purpose like training or testing, therapy, rehabilitation. There are a million different applications for this technology, and we sort of just said, we're going to focus on the tech. We started a little over 6 years ago, and so we've been all over the place working for clients ranging from HBO to Northrop Grumman.
Wow, that's interesting. So before Balti Virtual was founded, are you originally from the area here, Maryland, or where did you grow up?
Yeah, I grew up in Baltimore County, so just kind of the north suburbs of Baltimore, and spent most of my life here. I went away to college for a minute, but yeah, I've been here for a long time.
Yeah, we do live in a great area. So growing up north of Baltimore, what were you into as a kid? Were you always sort of into tech, or what was your interest back then?
I was really all over the place. I mean, through kind of middle school and high school, I always liked building things and inventing things. Made a robot when I was a young kid, but I also loved sports, usually the kind of weird ones like ice hockey and water polo. Those aren't the big sports in this area, obviously. And music. I love playing in bands and guitar. And so I think as I was getting ready to graduate high school, I wasn't really sure which one of those would be my main direction in life. I could see trying to be a writer or playing music. But yeah, there was always this kind of background of technology and tinkering that always really appealed to me. And when I got to college, I took my first real in-depth programming course, and just a light bulb went off. That's like, yes, this is what I like to do, this kind of creation, tinkering, design type of thing.
Where did you end up going for school, for college?
So that was kind of an interesting journey. I went to Connecticut College, which is small liberal arts school up in New London, Connecticut. And pretty much right away, my first semester, I took a programming course, loved it. Took a programming course. My second semester, took a couple more things. And really, this was like clicked. It was the thing that I wanted to do. So I ended up joining a startup that summer as my summer job, programming for this was 1996. And so it wasn't an internet startup exactly. It was like a fax-based startup. So it was, if you wanted to buy a used car, you'd call this number, tell them what you're looking for. They would take your specs, fax it out to a bunch of local dealers, and they would sort of fax it all back. And then you'd get we'd compile it into a report that got sent to the end customer over fax. Again, this is like kind of early days, but it was cool. It was a challenging project, and they ended up needing some work and made me an offer to stay on through the fall semester. So I actually deferred my sophomore fall semester from college and joined this startup. Which ultimately it wasn't a successful business, but it was kind of interesting to be there, a front row seat to one of these things and kind of seeing all the decisions you're making and the external forces that are sort of controlling whether or not you're going to be successful. So I sort of got back to college in that spring semester, and I had just a great experience there. I loved my friends. I played in some bands, but I realized that it wasn't going to work for me because they didn't offer a computer science major. And I started working with the school, exploring how can we create a new major. Like it was kind of liberal arts schools where you can really design your major in whatever you want. And so I figured, hey, if my friend's designing his major in 18th century costume design, can I design a major in computer science? And ultimately they shot that down. They said I couldn't. And so I ended up having to transfer. It was sort of a tough decision to make that jump. Looked around at a lot of different schools and ended up actually at UMBC, which was just an amazing place to be. It was not surprisingly on my radar. I think kind of mid 90s, Baltimore County, it wasn't as well known. It was kind of just at the beginning of Freeman Hrabowski's tenure there. But I mean, I went there having looked at Carnegie Mellon, MIT, some really top schools. And when I walked into their computer lab, I was just blown away. I mean, back in those days, the hot computer system was a Silicon Graphics workstation, and they just had them as far as the eye could see, kind of stacked out there. So I just was like, oh, this place is amazing. It's right around the corner. And so I transferred to UMBC.
There you go. The Retrievers, right? Is it?
That's right.
That's
right. The formidable Retrievers. I've got a serious chess team there. So look out.
It's so funny, Will, how your Connecticut school allowed your buddy to major in, you said 18th century costume design or something.
Yeah, that kind of stuff.
In a comp sci major, which I would think they'll be, yes, let's do it.
Yeah, it's strange thinking back, but even not that long ago, like in the 90s and even in the 80s, computer science wasn't really the major that it is today. It was almost like this kind of secondary thing, like the computer designers, the electrical engineers, hardware was like where everything important was happening. And the software was just kind of, oh yeah, those guys come along. They're sort of like the mechanics that go and, tighten the belts or whatever, where that's completely flipped. And I mean, I think to a large degree, a lot of the creativity is happening in software. But yeah, back then it wasn't in the card. I'm sure, I mean, I know they have a computer science major now. I don't know how long after I left. I imagine it wasn't more than 5 years that they did get one, but I think it was just the timing wasn't quite right. And I remember being in meetings with the president and members of the faculty, and we were all sort of looking at each other like, why can't we pull this off? And it just didn't quite work. It was a shame to have to leave my friends and bands and all these just really just wonderful experiences. But it was also really lucky for me because I took that sort of scary jump and transferred to UMBC. And actually before I started, so I was due to start in the fall, I got a summer job, and I really just pestered this local game company. I realized that flipped over a box from one of my favorite video game companies, Microprose Software, and I saw their address was Lakefront Drive in Hunt Valley, Maryland. I was like, wait a minute, that's like 5 minutes north of where I am. So I just started pestering them, and I was like calling them every week, kind of like, do you have an internship? What's happening? And they finally said, look, we don't have any internships. Just, stop calling. And I was like, well, I'm willing to work for free. And I think those were the magic words that they were like, all right, why don't you come in tomorrow? We'll take a look and see what you could do. And so I got an internship at Microprose Software, video game company, and started with like really low level kind of menial tasks. I was editing historical footage for a World War II flight simulator. I was recreating this like map of Europe, 2 kilometers at a time, with these like little palette of, there were something like 60 different textures I could use. So it'd be like, here's a river, or here's like the edge of a city, or here's whatever. So it's just like kind of mind-numbing work. But it was great because I wasn't stressed out. I wasn't like, I'm in over my head. I could kind of like work on slowly figuring out what the lay of the land was, and then kind of looking for ways to contribute. And so, it wasn't too long before I said over and over again, I can program. I built this game at home. Like, come on, let me do something. And they were like, well, all right, you use this map editor all day. Why don't you try to make that better? And so I kind of made some tweaks to that, and slowly worked my way up into actually getting some code in the game. They let me support. Back then, there was this kind of wave of joysticks that had motors in them, like to give you force feedback. Like, so when you pull on the stick or when you shoot the guns, it like shakes or whatever. And they're kind of niche, but we said, hey, somebody has to write support for this. We said we'd do it. Like, let's let Will do it. And I did it. I programmed that aspect of the game. And it was kind of funny. We put out a demo. I mean, it's funny in hindsight. It was tough at the time, but we put out a demo and the reviews were like, this joystick force feedback code is terrible. And like, this is like ruins the game and whatever. And I just remember being like so disappointed and crushed. And our lead programmer at the time was like, well, we're not done with the game. This is like just a demo, just fix it. And it was cool because it really just flipped my whole mindset around to like, okay, well, how can I make this better? How can I address all these things? And we ended up winning an award for that specific aspect of it. So it was cool that like, kind of I was lucky enough to have the right mentors to walk me through a pretty crushing disappointment to my 21-year-old self, and turn it into something really, really positive.
It's very cool how you were able to work on some of those. I still remember playing Nintendo and with the gun and the hunting game. I forgot what it was. You're hunting ducks. Yeah, duck hunt. There you go. And you can feel the vibration when you're shooting the gun. I would always miss, but you can feel the vibration of the gun when you're playing yes.
Yeah, that was those are the interesting days. Actually, make a lot of those parallels to like what virtual reality is going through these days. It's like now, a video game system, they all kind of look and feel about the same. Like you've got a controller, you've got a screen, a unit. Nintendo always does something interesting and weird, but aside from them, it's like, they're all kind of the same. But back in that original Nintendo era, it was like the first Nintendo came with a gamepad, a light gun, and a robot. And any one of those things could have been the controller. And that's kind of the Wild West sort of figure it out period that I think virtual reality is going through these days.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you're working with this video game company all through college, right?
Yeah. Actually, by the time I graduated college, I was actually the lead programmer on a commercially shipped title. So it was sort of an interesting dual education that I was getting at the time. Like I was working all day at, depending on which semester, some days I would have like day classes, whatever, but it's kind of jumping back and forth between computer science education at UMBC and then this kind of real world immersive learning on the job at Microprose.
Once you graduate UMBC, well, do you go full-time there or what happens?
Yeah, I was pretty much full-time.
Okay.
I think when I actually went full-time, I started making less money because I was working so much overtime before. But yeah, I went full-time, and it was an interesting ride. Like I started out there at a time when a lot of people were leaving the company. And so just kind of by virtue of being there for a while, by the end, I was like the programming lead. There were about 10 coders on my team. And so I just sort of, I guess, just by virtue of being there for a long time, like kind of worked my way up the ranks.
After being with the company there, what happened next?
Well, that's when my journey into entrepreneurship began. So at the end of see, this was probably 2002, 2003. We were working on an Xbox title called Dungeons and Dragons Heroes. We were all kind of pouring ourselves into this game. We had a lot to do and not a lot of time to do it. And so we're working a ton of hours. I was like, sleeping under my desk kind of thing. And a lot of us on the team were doing the same type of thing. And we finally got the game out, we shipped, and then pretty much immediately, our parent company informed us that they were closing our studio and we were all laid off. And so that was pretty much exactly the time that I decided that I didn't want to work for anyone else. I wanted to have like my future in my hands. And I was fortunate enough that a few of my other colleagues from Micropros felt the same way. And so 4 of us started a new company called Digital Steamworks. And we had sort of one initial vision of what we were going to do with the company that ended up not being right, but we kind of figured it out and pivoted our way through it. Initially, we thought we were going to build a commercial video game and get investment, or at least get a publishing deal with someone like Microsoft or Nintendo or Sony to complete the game's development and hire a team and so on. And so we put together a demo, spent a lot of time on that. And then we had this kind of road show where we took the demo out and we had this insane schedule. I think we were in 3 cities in 4 days, meeting with like 8 companies and everyone you think, Microsoft, Nintendo, EA, all the way down the line. And we really got the same feedback over and over again, which is, I like your concept, we like your game, but we're not going to fund it. Just, can you keep developing it? And, we were sort of like, we can keep developing it, but how do we pay our bills while we do this? So we realized that we had to figure out how to turn this into just more of a sustainable, real company. We couldn't just kind of keep building a demo in our spare time and not making any money. So we were really fortunate that our president of our company at the time had a lot of really good contacts within the game industry, especially in the local Hunt Valley game development scene, which people might not necessarily know that is like a national hotspot for game development and has been since like the mid 80s. But so our kind of pivot was, hey, there are all these studios that are working on their games. No one ever has enough time. They always have too much to do. Can we just see if they need help with specific pieces of the game? And so we kind of contributed to a number of games and projects just by taking some piece of it on and acting as a subcontractor. So we kind of built this services business out of what was supposed to be kind of a game development studio or a product company. And without really meaning to, we just kept doing that for the next 13 years, just sort of constantly looking for ways to build interesting projects for clients using video game development skills. And so those, like over that 13 years with Digital Steamworks, we did, we did an exhibit for the museum in DC when they opened on Pennsylvania Avenue, which was a game about being a reporter. We did a project with DARPA, which was to create an educational game for kids to teach physics concepts using kind of like a Angry Birds style game mechanic. We did all sorts of training and entertainment. We did a project for the NFL where we used the video game engine technology to teach players the playbook. And that even included some VR, where we had a virtual reality headset we could hook up. And this was 2005 to 2007 timeframe. And so virtual reality, especially consumer virtual reality hardware back then, was pretty bad. It was slow, expensive, low resolution, like, you name anything that a technology should have, and it didn't have it. But having this marquee client in the NFL, we were able to sort of say, okay, well, what if price is no object? What does the cutting edge of VR hardware look like? And so we tried a couple of different, like, really professional industrial design, like the kind of headsets that like Honda would use to walk through vehicle concepts and things like that. And these were pretty wild looking. I mean, these are heavy, bulky devices that one of them had like 16 screens, like 8 for each eye, and it had just a bundle of cables coming out of the back to like a server farm that powered it. And it was interesting. It was good. I mean, it ended up not working out for exactly what we wanted to do with it, but that really planted the seed for Balti Virtual, because, you know, trying this headset that was super industrial grade, it was like $250,000 or something like that. And then following along to when Oculus had the Kickstarter, and they released the Rift, and it was, I think, $400. And I got that thing, hooked it up to my computer, and looked around, and it was just like, oh my gosh, this is practically the same experience that I had on the $250,000 headset, you know, 4 or 5 years ago, in a $400 headset that's, you know, basically a smartphone screen stuck to a pair of ski goggles. Like, this is amazing, and this kind of has just taken a huge leap in quality and cost. So that was when we started really thinking about Balti Virtual.
And then that's when you decided to establish Balti Virtual, I assume. Then, what year was that, Will?
We started Balti Virtual in 2015.
Okay.
So that was, yeah, and I think part of that was Digital Steamworks. We were doing all these different things, from education games to 2D apps to 3D visualization. And we were getting spread a little bit thin and working on things that, like, what we were really good at with the core, like David, who's a co-founder in Balti Virtual and was one of the founders in Digital Steamworks as well, David Thompson. The two of us were really good at building interactive 3D experiences, like video games, you know, fancy way of saying video games. And so when we took those skills and we started applying them to Flash apps and like iOS things and whatever, it wasn't as, we were just sort of like as good as the average person at those things, where we were really, really great at this interactive 3D real-time type of thing. And that perfectly mapped onto VR and AR as well. And so, yeah, we started Balti Virtual in 2015, brought in our third co-founder, Sean Flaherty, who handled all the business development side of things, and just started looking for clients, looking for interesting projects, and again, kind of bootstrapped our way to business where we are today.
How was it that first year, the beginning few years with Balti Virtual, you know, as you said, trying to gain those first couple of clients?
It was tough. It was definitely interesting. I mean, back in 2015, when you said augmented reality to people, they had no idea what you were talking about mostly. You know, it was sort of like, huh? And virtual reality, you know, I had seen this huge jump in VR in 4 or 5 years and thought, oh, well, you know what that means is, you know, in the next 2 or 3 years, it's going to jump that level again, and everyone's going to have a VR headset by 2019 at the latest, you know, and they'll replace their iPhones, and away we go. And I think that's been an interesting education process. There's a good quote from Paul Sappho, who's a futurist, who's like, don't mistake a clear view for a short distance. And, you know, I think that was definitely the mistake I was making there. A clear view of what the future could be like, but maybe just assuming that it was a little bit like objects in mirror are not as close as they appear to be, kind of a thing. And so, you know, we thought we'd be doing a lot of virtual reality work. And what ended up happening was we realized we could take the exact same tools and skills and required to build an immersive VR experience for one of these headsets and use it to build a really interesting looking experience that anyone could access on their phone today with AR. And so that was kind of the unintentional pivot where we started doing a lot of AR work. And really one of the first things we did was we created this kids product, a bunch of temporary tattoos and stickers where you could put the tattoo on and scan it with an app, and like the shark on your hand turns into a 3D shark that's swimming around. And that was kind of an early win for us. Not so much in terms of how many tattoos we sold, because we realized very quickly that it just didn't make sense for us to get into like the shipping, logistics, printing, supply chain side of things. Again, that's like, what are we good at? What are the things that we're, I don't even think we're as good as the average person at those. We're probably worse. But what ended up happening with just building that product was we ended up getting a lot of other work that looked and felt like that. Like Under Armour saw the kids' tattoos and thought, oh, could we take that and make our store come to life in the same kind of way? And so we did a project with them where we had all these like markers around their Disney store, and you could scan it with an app and see the rock jump out and do stuff. So we were very lucky early on to kind of a combination of building stuff, putting stuff out there, which I'm a huge believer in, of just like get your stuff out there, because you'll never be able to think about how someone else can shape it and turn it into something else, like just working conceptually on a whiteboard. Like it's just, there's so much benefit in just putting things out into the world and seeing what people do with them. And we're also extremely lucky that we crossed paths with people that were creative enough to take look at a temporary tattoo on a kid's hand and say like, oh, that's what we'll do with retail. Because that is very uncommon. Like there are a lot of people you run across, they would see, an AR in-store experience for Home Depot and be like, yeah, but we're Lowe's, or, yeah, but we're a different type of store that doesn't even have anything to do with us. We're folks at Under Armour were able to make this pretty huge leap, and it worked.
I love that project you just mentioned now with Under Armour, Will, as far as the AR, and especially when it comes to retail, you're seeing a lot of these retailers going under because online, a lot of the death of the brick and mortar, especially I'm in commercial real estate, I'm seeing it firsthand. I wish more would incorporate this into their stores and locations.
Yeah, and this is interesting. This is 2016, 2017. And so they were really thinking, look, e-commerce is coming. It's easier in so many ways, but you don't have that. How do we elevate the store experience? And, Under Armour, a lot of other folks are doing the same thing, but they're great at it. Of like, how do you create something special in store that makes it so you're not just, I know my size, I'll order that pair of pants, send them back if they don't fit. And so, yeah, they were very early into that idea of experiential retail. And that's something that obviously the pandemic has only accelerated quite a lot, with people thinking, okay, well, I'm comfortable ordering online. Why am I going to a location? I think there are a handful of brands that have started to answer that question in really compelling ways.
What was the feedback? I'm curious. I know this was back in 2016, I think 17 you mentioned with Under Armour, but what was the feedback as far as when the patrons, the customers would come into the store?
Generally, people thought it was cool. Back then we had a limitation in that to have these experiences, and it was just kind of a limitation of the technology. In order to have these augmented reality experiences, you had to download an app, which was a much bigger hurdle than I would have expected. I thought, I don't know, I have a million apps on my phone. I don't even know where they are. I have to search to find anything. But most people don't want to download an app, and they don't even know what their iTunes password is, or their Google Play or whatever. And so that was just a huge hurdle where we thought, okay, we can deliver these experiences where, if you show it to somebody, they think it's really neat, they play with it, they engage with it, it really captivates them. But how do you get that? How do you get them into it? And so, I mean, the patch, the kind of hack for that particular space was we just had some iPads with the software loaded that people could just kind of pick up and look around. But that really changed our direction. And we spent the last 2 or 3 years really focused on not just the technology and the content of the experience, but really broadening to think about how can we make this as easy as possible to get someone into an augmented reality experience? And so we've had to change the tools that we use to develop them. We've had to change our approach, but ultimately it's proven to be a really useful direction, because now we can deliver these AR experiences just through your phone's browser. So if you scan a QR code, which, kind of after the last couple of years, everyone knows how to do, it's been helpful. You can go right into an experience. So no download or app store or anything like that. So that's been a big win. And so we've had campaigns. We had an immersive game that we built for a client. I can't say exactly who they are, but it was a major beverage brand, and we had 7 million people play this game in 1 month, which is pretty unheard of. There'd be really, really hard pressed to get like an app or something like that to that wide of an audience, where this was just kind of like their customers click one link and they're into it. And so that really helped validate that for us.
That's great. You and I here are talking about AR and VR, and we understand. For those of the people in the audience who may not understand, can you just briefly explain what is AR? Yeah, what is AR compared to VR, please?
No, you're absolutely right. We should have started right there. And even being a few years into this, I think we just published a what is AR and what is VR blog post, because again, we're in our own tech bubble and we're talking about whatever the specs of the next headset and stuff like that. But yeah, so broadly speaking, virtual reality is using a headset, some kind of immersive, the funny looking goggles we've all seen, to really play a trick on your brain to make you feel like you're somewhere else. So you feel convincingly that you're in another place, and that can be a video game, a live sporting event, a conference. It can be really just about anything. But the core of VR is put on a headset, feel like you're somewhere else. Augmented reality is more about bringing computer graphics into the real world. So by and large, these aren't headsets now. There are some headsets, but the big difference today is that AR can be experienced on a phone. So something like Pokemon Go, you can see a view of the real world, but you also see this character there kind of jumping around. So that's augmented reality. It's, augmenting your view of the world versus putting you in a completely synthetic environment. And I will say, for anyone that's confused between the two, it's only going to get worse, because the two are really kind of converging and the lines are blurring very quickly. So like, for instance, the Oculus Quest, so I'm going in these headsets here, the Quest, it's a virtual reality headset, but they also have augmented reality features where it has these cameras looking out, and you can somehow mix, depending on what experience you're using, you can mix in imagery from the real world into these virtual environments. So these lines are kind of blurring, and there's not as hard of a line between VR and AR as there might be. Generally, we look at like experiences that can be delivered on phones today, and then things that require like specialized headsets.
A lot of people out there will, obviously they're not familiar with the industry, but they might not even be in touch as far as what the future is going to look in the next couple of years with all this. And, especially recently, with Facebook is no longer Facebook, it's now Meta. And we were just talking about this acquisition Microsoft just did of Activision this morning for $7 billion. And I just think it's going to just change much more faster. But I just think the general public are just obviously living in some other bubble. They're not even aware of all this, of what's going on right now.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's not uncommon. And it's part of the reason that we started Balti Virtual with a focus in this niche, even though we knew it wouldn't really be big enough to sustain us in a meaningful way for a while. But a lot of technology works this way. And, looking back to when I was a kid, we had dial-up service to something called CompuServe, which wasn't even really the internet. It was just kind of like its own little, precursor to AOL. And then, you know, we had internet dial-up, where there wasn't really much there on in the early 90s. A lot of web pages didn't even have images. And you could show that to most people and say, like, this is going to be the future. And they'd say, you're crazy. There's nothing interesting. It has to kind of cross that threshold of being easy to use and being useful. And I think until it does that, it sort of might as well not even exist for most people, unless you're like really on the cutting edge of like, what's coming next? And I'm interested in trying, you know, 100 products and knowing that maybe 70 of them are going to fail. But yeah, I don't think that's uncommon. I think that there's been there are a lot of people using touchscreen smartphones before the iPhone came out, but it wasn't really until the iPhone that kind of crossed that mass market. People understand it. The experience has been made easier, type of threshold. And VR is certainly going through that, where, you know, 4 or 5 years ago, you basically need a computer science degree to set up a VR system. You have to, you know, install base stations and get your latest video drivers and make sure that your experience is compatible and set up your screen to do whatever. And now it's moving closer to the like easy button, you know, iPhone type of experience. I think Oculus Quest, or I guess now it's called the Meta Quest, is a step in that direction. It's kind of like the Apple II or Macintosh, you know, kind of simple, like, you know, there are a couple of rough edges, a couple things that might be confusing, but it's moving in the direction of, you know, really refined, accessible experience. And I'm sure that, you know, Apple is long rumored to have a device in the works. I would think that's going to set a new bar for approachability, you know, how well this type of device can work and how sort of seamless it can be. And I think at that point, then it'll be on a lot more folks' radar. But until then, it's kind of a hacker hobbyist type of thing, which is okay. I mean, I think that's kind of natural, and a lot of tech sort of follows that.
What do you personally think the future holds for the industry? You know, whether with, you know, I hear people with just glasses and then you can, you know, do your thing, or with the metaverse now and everything else.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to separate kind of reality from the hype. And, you know, you hear like metaverse, Web3, like what is all going to be decentralized, avatar system. You know, I think I've always taken a very just kind of no hype view of it, and looked for, like, there are a couple things that I thought early on in starting Balti Virtual, even when I really misread how long it was going to take for this tech to go mainstream. I figured, okay, before it goes mainstream, like, there are going to be markets where it makes sense today. And there are going to be applications that are provide enormous return on investment. And so we should try to focus on those. And then as kind of more and more users come into the technology, then we might be able to, you know, build more like a traditional game or experience that can be published to consumers. But I think that's been the path the technology has been, where there are these kind of funny applications for virtual reality where it's just hugely beneficial. I mean, training is one of them. We had some early exposure to that with our football product. But even just what's happened in the last 5 or so years, basically, if you need to learn how to do any job that is physical and has any element of danger or expensive, you know, things are expensive if you do it wrong. Virtual reality is almost always a huge win there, because it's just much more interesting for whoever's learning, especially as this younger kind of like Minecraft, Fortnite generation enters the workforce. You know, they're not going to want to watch the training videos from the 80s and flip through the manual. They're going to want to they want the in-game tutorial. You know, how do I operate this machine? And so I think VR lets people do that in a really interesting way. And the kind of fringe benefit for the established players is that it generates a lot of performance data. So you can look at, okay, how did all the users in my organization, how did every trainee in my organization do with this task? Or where do they struggle? Or where do we have knowledge gaps across the organization? Like you can kind of just mine that automatically without having to have a bunch of people do questionnaires, things like that, just by kind of capturing, minute to minute what people are doing. So training is a long-winded way of saying there are a handful of great applications. I think training is huge. There have already been huge wins in augmented reality for e-commerce. Like, let me see that couch in my room before I buy it, especially with big, expensive, bulky purchases where, ordering the wrong thing and then returning it creates a lot of waste on kind of everybody's end. And so, as the technology to digitize products becomes cheaper and faster and more accessible, you're only going to see more and more things kind of come into the fold there. And so, I don't know, I think over the next few years, it's going to be a steady growth. It's going to be, again, these specific kind of killer applications for specific industries are going to continue to take off. Tech is going to become easier to use, better, cheaper, sort of all the things that tech just kind of does naturally. And so more and more people are going to get into it, and eventually it'll hit a tipping point. And I think there's the little bit further stuff of like, when are you going to not use your phone? You're going to use glasses, or glasses that are talking to your phone or something like that. I think that's TBD. There are a bunch of players that are working on that now. Apple's rumored, Facebook has talked about it, or Meta has talked about it, Snap, there are a bunch of them. I'd say that's at least 5 years out. And I think the joke in the industry is that it's kind of like the perfect AR glasses that look like Ray-Bans and somehow have a battery that lasts all day and have a display that looks totally realistic. That's 5 years away. Like, it's been 5 years away for the last 10 years, and probably will be 5 years away for the next 10 years. But I do think that technology is continuing to advance and things are getting better and better.
You just mentioned the whole thing about couch, and right now I'm dealing with it with my wife, where we're looking to remodel our living room and buy a brand new couch. And I'm just thinking it would be great. She showed me all these websites and all these pictures, and if we put it this way or the sectional this way. But it would be great if we could get our phone and do AR. But I didn't think that existed. Well, that's not how we've been doing it, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's right now it's a little bit siloed. So you've got, I think, IKEA, Wayfair. There are a handful of companies that have that type of view in my space integration. I think Amazon has it for certain products. And so it's just starting, but already, I mean, the case studies that have come out of it are like, they're seeing 95% higher conversion rates and hugely diminished return rates. So it's like, it's kind of become a no-brainer for a specific set of products. Like if you have something that's expensive and big and, so on and so forth. And so again, like as technology improves, you're probably going to see it more and more places. I think Home Depot has it as well in their app. There are certain products you can just view in AR. So,
okay.
Yeah, take a look. See if you can find a couch that you like on Wayfair or one of those other ones.
I'll definitely mention it to my wife.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Right on.
What would you say drives and motivates you?
Drives and motivates me. I think really two parts. I think one thing that drives me is creating and building interesting experiences, combining things in novel ways. Another one is really just trying to do whatever part that I can to improve the future and try to think about how to shepherd technology in a responsible way and how to bring more people into the fold and some of those things. So those are really the two things, is kind of tinkering and I don't mean to overstate my impact on it, but I like to think that I'm trying to make things better in whatever way I can. And so those are really the two core drives for me. Certainly not about money or prestige. I think that neither one is super interesting right now, but I think, building cool stuff is really is number one, and making the world a little better is number two.
That's cool. I know you mentioned earlier how you believe you might have been a little bit too early to the party with Balti Virtual. What advice would you give to anyone who wanted to start any type of business, whether tech or non-tech related? Any pointers?
Yeah, I mean, I would also say that we were really early to the party with our VR training in 2005. In fact, like the product flopped, and I think 8 years later, a company raised hundreds of millions of dollars on more or less the same concept. So, maybe there's some satisfaction in being early, but it doesn't actually make it an actual difference at the end of the day. So, the big advice for anybody, whether you might be early to a space or whether you might be late, or kind of wherever you are, is to build products, put things out there, ship stuff, and see how people respond to it. Like engage with your customers, engage with your clients as much as you can to understand what opportunities exist out there. Like even the football thing is a good example, because we started that project as like an AI project where we said, well, we can make an AI that'll run the play, simulate it against another thing, and spoke to a couple of coaches, and they said, no, that's not what we want. We want just to show players what the play is. And so that kind of, be flexible, be open-minded, be curious, look to learn as much as you can, and build tangible things that then you can point to and say, well, what about that? And even if the response is, well, that's terrible, but it would be better if you did X, Y, Z, or that's not great, but like it gives you credibility in the conversation because you've spent time building something. You're not just like sketching ideas on napkins, and it gives you just a tangible touchstone. So put stuff out there and then talk to as many potential customers about said thing as you can. And I think that tends to be a pretty good approach.
That's great advice. Are there any particular habits or skills that you feel that have helped you, whether, on your personal side of things or on business side?
I think I've had to, stepping into a CEO role over the last 6 years, I've had to get a lot more organized. So I think if you're starting a company, it's really easy to underestimate the amount of just inputs and outputs that you're dealing with every day. And if you don't have a good system for following up with people, or tracking tasks or making progress, it's going to be tough. Things are going to fall by the wayside. Things are going to slip through the cracks. And so it doesn't matter really what that system is. It's not like, my patented thing that I'm going to charge you money for, but it's like, find whatever you need to like, whether that's a calendar or a scrap of paper, or you write it on your hand or whatever, just find a good system to organize and kind of structure your week, because that is super important, especially as things start to get really, really busy.
What do you use? Do you write things or any software?
Yeah, I've got a shifting list of things that we use, or I use personally, and then our team uses ClickUp quite a lot. I have some Trello boards. We have a bunch of Google Docs. And I guess the other thing I'll say is, like, I really like this idea of like continuous improvement, like the Kaizen type of thing, so rather than like every day, we're going to do something completely different, or new system, new policy, we're always looking at like, okay, all right, we've got this doc that we're using for X. Is this working for everybody? Okay, it is. Great. Let's leave it. What can we do to make it a little bit better? And so, like, even if you look at like how our team approaches like what we're doing week to week, that's evolved quite a lot over the last 5 years. Now we have specific meetings on set times where we talk about new projects, or we have kind of just our general high level business, like all the department heads get together and work on things. So yeah, just having a process, but yeah, specific tools, ClickUp, Trello, Google Docs, whatever works. I've had in the past, I've had those marble notebooks, just kind of write down a task with a big square next to it that I check off when it's done. It's kind of satisfying. It's sort of like whatever carrot you need to dangle in front of yourself to get stuff done, go for it. But it should be flexible and allow you to kind of reprioritize things, because what's at the top of your list on one day might get bumped down to position 12 based on what happens the next day. So
what would you say is your biggest challenge with your role at Balti Virtual today?
Big challenge today is trying to find things that are scalable. So a lot of what we do is very bespoke, custom, high-end, cool experiences for interesting clients. It's stuff that I wouldn't think that I would be complaining about 5 years ago. I would have been like, I'm thrilled to have these problems. But now the issue we have is, how do we find more projects that sort of build on existing code bases? And someone gave me really the great advice of what got you here was saying yes to everything, and what will get you to the next level is what you say no to. And so we're trying to be a little bit more deliberate in which types of projects we take, and making sure that they really build in the direction that we want to go. And they're not just sort of, we're chasing a shiny object because it's a cool brand or an interesting project or something like that.
Sure. Coming to an end here now, Will, what does the future look like for you and Balti Virtual?
Well, we're moving our office to the metaverse, and we're going to be only accessible on Web3. What is the future? Hopefully the future looks like more projects that build on a common base, ideally moving to more products and less services. So something a little bit more scalable, and yeah, kind of more of the same, progressive refinement. How do we keep getting better? I can't believe we're already at the end. That flew by. This is interesting.
Yeah, we're almost coming to an end. When you're not busy working, what do you like to do for fun in your free time?
Well, I love just kind of walking around. I'm down in Fells Point in Baltimore. So the park is over here, the waterfront. I like building stuff. I've got this kind of crazy workshop behind me where I'm usually tinkering on.
It looks pretty cool, by the way.
Yeah, this is where I started the company. And moved back here in March of 2020 with the pandemic. So yeah, tinkering, play some games, video games, board games, pretty much the usual stuff.
Awesome. If people want to learn more about you, Will, and Balti Virtual, where can they find out more information?
Sure. So our website, www.baltivirtual.com. We're on all the social networks, the socials at Balti Virtual. LinkedIn, I'm there, Will G. Always happy to talk. I love catching up with people and hearing what they're working on and what they're passionate about.
Well, thanks again for coming on. Really had a fun time. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Otto. I appreciate it. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you. You too. Take care.
See ya.